that are renters here in Dana Point. Thank you.
All right, we've got Andrea Rodriguez.
Hi, mi nombre es Andrea Rodríguez, vivo en San Juan Capistrano, gano $13.65 como housekeeping aquí en Laguna Cliff Marriott. Si cree que mi familia puede permitirse alquilar un lugar por $300, $400 o $500 la noche para quedarse cerca de la costa, entonces no comprende la vida de la gente trabajadora como yo. No deberíamos tener que renunciar a nuestra casa para crear habitaciones de hotel caros para turistas. Por favor, no permita más alquileres de viviendas completas y haga cumplir la prohibición de la ciudad. Gracias.
I'll be translating. Hi, my name is Andrea, and I live in San Juan Capistrano. I make $13.65 as a housekeeper. If you think my family can afford to rent a place for $300, $400, or $500 a night to stay near the coast, then you severely do not understand the lives of the working people like me. We should not have to give up our homes to create luxury homes and rentals for tourists. Please do not permit any more whole home rentals and enforce the city's measures. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've got one more here for Barbara Wilson.
Good evening. I'm Barbara Wilson. I'm a resident of Dana Point. And I have some questions about your process to enact a short-term rental policy. Clearly, you have not engaged large segments of our residents and therefore biasing your regulations towards input from STR owners. It also seems that council may want to circumvent the requirements of the Coastal Commission. When council enacted the resolution calling for a pilot program, they took great pains to strike any language referring to Coastal Commission approval. During the July 21st meeting, Councilman Mueller stated, as I quote, if this, meaning the STR program, has to be in an LCP, I am going to vote no on this. That is Coastal's position. They want control. We can allow these things, put them in our business regs. Wherever it ends up, we can allow them. Let's pass one we think they will accept and let them tell us no. We need to make sure the city has control of this ordinance. We can't allow an outside agency to take over the sovereignty of the city. When Councilman Wyatt questioned the city attorney, he agreed it would be technically illegal to change zoning in the coastal zone without the Coastal Commission's approval. Dana Point's local coastal program does not refer to STRs at all. No LCPA or CDP has been accepted by the council nor endorsed by the Coastal Commission as required. The Coastal Commission was formed to protect beach access and is charged with overseeing zoning in coastal cities. When we asked the Coastal Commission about the ability to circumvent this process, their staff confirmed that the Coastal Commission would need to approve a CDP or LCPA before both an ordinance or even a pilot program can be enacted. I have given the city clerk copies of the email in question for you to review. Tonight's staff report refers to a CDP, but does not make it clear whether they think the city can approve a CDP on their own without Coastal Commission approval. According to the Coastal Act, this is only possible if Dana Point's LCP already allows an STR, which it does not. Here are my questions. Do you plan to take the pilot program to the Coastal Commission as required? And if so, has anyone advised the three councilmen who clearly don't want the Coastal Commission to have any say in this matter? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, before I close the public hearing, is there any other people that wish to speak that have?
We're clear.
Good, okay. I'm gonna go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to commission. for, if you got any follow-up questions, and then we can go through a process of, walking through each one of the items starting on page 9. Commissioner, you want to just go around the horn?
So, and this is for you, Jeff. It goes off of the chair's comments on how we're handling violations. Is there any way for homeowners to send videos of violations to staff for enforcement?
Absolutely. We haven't used it in the case of short-term rentals, but
Right.
we certainly use it in other enforcement mechanisms or cases, excuse me.
Okay. Continuing on, I took some notes on all of the comments. To Mr. Wyatt's point, is there a reason why we kind of lumped everything together and not created three separate categories of short-term rentals?
We see that as the process that would be addressed in phase 2 when we're actually developing the program.
Okay. So we're going to talk about it, but it's to come.
Exactly. Once we start developing the program, we determine what type of permits we are open to and the location and number.
Okay. There's been a lot of comments on on-site management, and I don't know how practical that is. I mean, I guess what it would ultimately say is the only type of short-term rental that you could have would be, basically somebody renting a room from you.
Exactly.
Right.
That's what they're
Overnight.
referring to as the home stays or the home shares,
So that would just exclude everything else.
potentially.
Is there anything that says we can't limit short-term rentals in condo projects to a certain percentage?
No, there isn't.
And
Again, that's something we addressed in phase 2.
okay.
The Laguna Beach model, for instance, they recognize that for multi-tenant facilities, perhaps they'd limit it to 15% to be short-term rentals, so you aren't impacting that affordable or the rental units.
And the same thing holds true for occupancy?
Number of tenants, is that what
Yeah.
you're speaking of? We have not addressed that yet. Does our current code talk about occupancy? It does. Yes.
Okay. I hope in the next phase we can bring more of the hotel STR discussion into to the forefront so we can address those kinds of issues that the public may have.
If I can address that, Chair Nelson, regarding the outreach. Part of phase 2, we do see as doing some more aggressive outreach, including outreach to the hotels and also doing a citywide postcard, if you will, to kind of highlighting the upcoming events that might be available for the broader public to attend. And they'll be including not only property owners, but also tenants.
On the dog nuisance, what's the best way to handle that?
It's a noise nuisance, so you can just contact code enforcement. We went out on plenty of dogs barking and
Okay.
see if it was a violation. I think the way the new noise ordinances are written will help that as well, right? If you're standing at the property line and I can hear, it's during quiet hours and I can hear some sort of audible noise coming from it,
Right.
well, that's a violation.
Okay.
And in the past, I'd have to go back and get a decibel reader and read it at 55 decibels for a prolonged period of time. The way we wrote the code, the subcommittee wrote the code, it just makes it cleaner,
Okay.
in my opinion.
But for all homeowners out there, if you've got a dog that's barking, take a video of it, call code enforcement. Even if they take the dog back in the house, you can still say, this is what just happened, and show it to code enforcement.
You could, correct.
Okay. What's the requirement on car parking? Is it mandated that all cars are in the parking lot, or I'm sorry, on the driveway or in the garage?
The code doesn't dictate specifically where the vehicle spaces are. However, it does identify that there's 2 regulations. One that identifies the number of parking spaces required, as well as the maximum number of parking spaces. So with that, that is what's identifying the parking for each STR.
Okay, so I guess it kind of goes hand in hand with this occupancy issue. If you've got, let's say you've got a 3-bedroom house, you only got to provide parking for 3 spaces, not, we shouldn't have 16 people in a 3-bedroom house.
That's correct.
Okay. Um, Can we talk a little bit about this notion, and I get this all the time, on what businesses are authorized in residential use or residential zoning, and how this impacts STRs?
So the code does allow for home occupations. We do require a home occupation permit. So short-term rentals obviously is a different category where if we were to create an ordinance, it would be required a short-term rental permit. So that is how they are distinguished. Jeff, did you anything else to add to that?
I can specifically address sober living homes if that is your question.
That's
Yeah.
a good idea.
So, sober living homes, as defined by the state, would be a sober living environment, which is 6 individuals who are choosing to live together because they are like minded and they are treated as any other household, single family residents in the city. The way the city in the lawsuits that we've gone after them have said it's not that you're doing a business in a residential area, but you're providing some sort of treatment in a residential area. And the ones that we have settled out have said, okay, we won't provide a treatment and we'll collect individual rent checks. It's not a business. So the sober living environments that are operating in town are operating as a single family residence.
Okay.
However, you have residential recovery facilities which are operating as businesses in a residence, but those are mandated and licensed by the state of California.
On platform accountability, is there any way to go after Airbnb to make sure that they're holding up? They've got more clout than we do because that's the marketing end of this.
We have had conversations with Airbnb as well as VRBO. Is that correct? And we are looking at to coordinate with them to better have their support. And, like, for instance, requiring to have permit numbers on their advertisements, or else they can't advertise. What was suggested tonight is you can actually issue penalties to the platforms, and that is something unique to me. We would want to look into Santa Monica's example to see what that is all about. Okay. Anything to add, guys? Nope.
I would just say that we suggested a required field, but it's already in our code that they have to have their permit number on their advertisements.
Right.
And Airbnb has recently said to us that if our regulation as it currently stands is sufficient, and they will move forward with anybody who is advertising on Airbnb who does not have a permit number, those will be taken down.
Another challenge, I'm sorry to jump in, about the platforms is that there's more than just those two.
Right.
There's several out there. And Host Compliance, the platform that we use to assist us in identifying unpermitted locations, has been very good. We get daily or weekly reports from them. And I think currently we have an average of less than 10 unpermitted. I understand we have identified several more than that, but I think sometimes we search Dana Point in a platform, it'll come up in locations beyond Dana Point. And that might be why some of the searches are showing more short-term rentals in our community than we actually have.
Okay. That was, obviously that was coming. How much do we get, what is the STR fee in order to get a permit?
The annual permit fee is $150.
And that doesn't cover cost?
I don't know, it probably doesn't today. When it's first established, it should have.
Right.
But in developing the program, we probably would assess the actual fee, because it is supposed to cover administrative costs.
So in the next phase, we'll talk about what the proper fee is on an annual basis. Jeff, are you aware of this 338 sheriff calls?
I'm sure the sheriff's gets a lot of calls. She didn't specify what the calls are for.
it just seemed to me that they were short-term rental calls.
Yeah, I can't,
You can't,
I can't, you know,
okay.
And
figure
that
that out. But I will say that, you know, the sheriff's department, as I stated, has a list of all of our STR permits
Right.
and the addresses, and they will send us a monthly report of any calls for service at the end of the month.
Okay.
And it's typically 3 or 4 per month, and typically they don't have anything to do with short-term rental nuisances.
Can you give me an example of what's really happened?
A fraud. They might get a call in for fraud. They might get a call in for, you know, some other illegal activity, but it's not necessarily related to nuisance or noise, parking or trash.
So just to reiterate, we do coordinate with the Sheriff's Department on an extensive level, and so I know it's been stated several times.
Okay. I guess my final question is the CDP process to the Coastal Commission. Can you kind of walk us through what happens, what we're going to do? Do we have to go to the Coastal Commission?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So this concept of a pilot program first came up with actually our discussions with Coastal Commission staff. It was suggested by them that we pursue this approach to see how a program might look for our community and try to vet it basically and adjust it as needed until we're ready to bring our LCP forward. However, it was recognized by the Coastal Commission staff and ourselves that a coastal development permit is needed. And the city having our own local coastal program, we're able to issue the CDP ourselves. It will be reviewed by the Planning Commission. It is appealable to the City Council and then ultimately can be appealed to the Coastal Commission themselves. So the idea being is once we have the pilot program in place, have it in place perhaps 3 years or so, and we're comfortable with what it looks like, then an LCP would be a process to actually establish the program within our certified program.
Okay. That's all I have. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Vice Chair Donor?
Yeah, I'd like to address the Phase 1 and Phase 2. A number of the points made earlier about how many owners could operate, what types, what kind of homestays, what the Coastal Commission might charge. All those issues are related to the second phase of this project. The first phase, the only thing that we're trying to accomplish is, do the existing regulations allow adequate enforcement of the rules? And if the rules aren't adequate, then those need to be revised. And if they're revised, it's been done with the city staff and with the enforcement group so that the existing regulations can be enforced. The second thing is the issue of homeowner associations. Homeowner associations are operated by CCNRs. And in some associations, in Beach Road and in Carniche, those particular associations, they permit short-term rentals. And so it's not the city's issue, it's the homeowners association or the district in the case of Beach Road. The platform providers provide another opportunity for enforcement that has not been the case previously. And there's an economic interest by the platform providers. They have an economic interest in making sure that the people that are advertising are approved by the city. And the three types of homestay, primary home, and non-primary home are issues that will be addressed in the second phase. So I think that's my major contribution.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Donor. Commissioner Murphy, do you have any questions for staff? Okay. Great. I have a couple here. Most of them you actually covered most of them, Commissioner Gabbard, but let me just go through these really quickly. Going back to the dog issue, it's the first time I've heard that, but certainly not the first time or I'm not surprised that it's been a problem. So, Mr. Rosser, what are the current rules, setting aside STRs? What are the laws around barking dogs? Because dogs bark, right?
Dogs bark. Typically, we have coastal animal authority that handles. We have, you know, animal control officers that handle most of those calls, and we defer those to CASA.
Is there a, they're allowed to bark 10 times in 5 minutes? You have no idea.
Honestly, we defer it to CASA.
Okay.
But I think, as I stated, the noise regulations, as they're written, specifically related to STRs, could help that situation. We have gotten complaints in the past. They've been anonymous for barking dogs, especially in the Lantern Village area. And we've gone down and looked around and investigated and knocked on doors. Most of those calls were anonymous, so we couldn't verify them. But we have certainly looked into it in the past.
Okay. Hopefully it wasn't my dog. He barks every once in a while. But we don't let him outside to do that. But I know it's an issue. So in that regard, if somebody calls in a complaint on an SDR with the dog, does it get handed off to the animal controller, or is it a situation where you guys would then take the case?
No, it hasn't. In the past, we've gone down, and our code officer, who's responsible for SDRs, will go and knock on neighbors' doors and try and come figure out what's going on.
Okay. So, and we could talk about this maybe when we go through each item, but on the platform regulations and the idea that, they're going to do our job, I think is always a tricky one. When I say do our job, make sure that only permitted units are up there. And I think, the way I hear it is the first step is figuring out if they're permitted STR to violate them, right? If you're, you go up on Airbnb and you can't find the permit number, you have to search for it. Before you can even violate them, you need to determine whether they have a permit number. Is that?
That's correct. So our current code states that you must display your Dana Point permit number on your advertisement. And I do know that all 137 permit holders have their permits on their advertisements.
Okay, so which makes enforcement a little bit easier, I would assume.
Yes, and we did have to send letters to some of those permit holders and remind them and to keep their permit numbers updated and get that on all their advertisements across all the platform boards.
Is it uniform?
It's not uniform currently. So they might have it in the description, they might have it here, they might have it there. It's sometimes hard to find, and that's something that we are talking with the platforms about having a uniform field that's right up front where it's easily identifiable.
Can we, in considering that we don't want to, I always think of how do we maintain control and not have, some third party making decisions for us. Can we just require every STR that has an image, every single picture, very similar to how we have site plan requirements or drawing requirements, that they all on the bottom right-hand corner in certain size font include their STR, and if they don't, it's an automatic violation. And
works for me. That'd be a discussion
for
the
policymakers.
policymakers.
The situation, I would think, is if someone's surfing the web, it sounds like we've got some citizens here that are doing research, have come across what they believe are unpermitted units. If there's no permit number, then regardless, they're in violation, which we would want to enforce that. I would
Sounds
think.
pretty smart to me.
Okay, so we can talk about that in this upcoming conversation. Private right of actions. Maybe you can help me with understanding what rights. As a homeowner, I could go sue my neighbor, I would assume. But does private right of action allow them to enjoin the city in some law? What's the difference between my current rights to sue a neighbor and then rights as under this idea of private right of action? Is there a difference?
So in terms of private rights of action, typically what we see is at the state level, state legislation will authorize sort of private attorney general, more or less. In terms of how litigation would be set up, obviously without a private right of action, you can still sue your neighbor. for violating some sort of regulation that's out there. I would assume that with a private right of action, what's envisioned is enjoining the city into the lawsuit and effectively forcing the city to enforce its rules. There might be some other mechanisms to do that without a private right of action, but I won't get into all of those.
Yeah, no, and I don't want to just I'm trying to understand the legalities of, we have a policy, we have enforcement provisions. For whatever reason, the city's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, at least in my, as a homeowner. What can I go after my neighbor for quiet enjoyment, and the idea that, you know, the city's not going to enforce those rules, so they may be more aggressive than normal rules. How
Yeah,
does
there
that
would
play?
be different causes of action that would be asserted against if it was homeowner to homeowner. If there's a private right of action included, those would be somewhat separate
Okay, so it's
causes
a
of
different.
action, but same general concept.
Got it. Okay, so it would be something that maybe you could take a look at, and as part of our next phase, talk about additions. My assumption would be, and I guess my next question would be, after tonight, assuming we get through the tables and we all agree on, you know, what recommendations to make, we're not closing the door on the enforcement provisions, I would assume. And as we continue down this road of trying to figure out what's right, what's wrong with STRs, we may have to go backwards and reopen these and amend them again, right? Would that be fair? Okay. Would it be fair to say that we may end up coming back on phase 2 and saying we should only have 100 SDRs, and we're actually going to reduce the amount? I mean, that would be an outcome that could occur from this process. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think those are my only questions. So, you know, I'm done this a few times with our code amendments, but I think that, you know, and I'm certainly willing to take suggestions. But maybe we go page by page, given that we've got, you know, quite a bit to go through. And, you know, I guess I would just ask each one of you to look at, you know, starting on, I think it's page 9. Is that correct? Yep. Page 9, if there's anything on page 9 that you want to discuss. We could. Could we put, or do we have this set up to put each page up? Okay.
We don't allow any advertisement or permits in those HOAs.
I believe that's already included in the ordinance, if I'm looking at the right document, 5.38.080A subdivision 2. And we require the owner to provide proof that short-term rentals are not prohibited by the CCNRs. Done.
This is the one you were talking about, posting the short-term rental permit number? And you wanted to clarify, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that
Hit your mic. So,
recommended regulation is to require the owner or manager to live within 20 minutes. And then the second part of that was require the owner or manager to abate an issue within 20 minutes. They may be required to arrive on site within 20 minutes and receive the complaint to address the issue and ensure there's not a reoccurrence. And the third item, discuss all short-term rentals shall provide the property owner manager emergency contact information on the exterior of the short-term rental that is city approved, standardized, and is legible and visible from the right-of-way. Next, replace the minimum age to 25 years. In the past, it was 18. And no change to a minimum 2-night stay and minimum occupancy, 2 guests per bedroom, 2 additional guests, no change. And noise, amend the regulations to include corporate meetings to the list of non-permitted of actions. Is the next page?
yeah, no. So let's stop there. So on these, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. Is there anybody that has any concerns with the current way they're formed, or would like to discuss potential changes now?
The only thing that I'm on the first one, and we live in Southern California, 20 minutes travel time means a lot of different things at different times during the day. So it can be 20 minutes to get from here to Newport, and sometimes it can be 20 minutes to get from here to San Clemente, depending on what time of day and what season of the year it is. So how are we defining that?
Well, I think the issue is local management. I mean, so if you live in Santa Monica, you can't be a manager.
No, I understand
So-
that, but does that mean if you have a house, if you're up in Newport, can you still be a manager? Because sometimes it takes more than 20 minutes to get down.
I think on Friday, Saturday nights, if I were renting it out, I'd make sure I had a local contact to get over there in short term. I mean, there's a huge economic incentive for the owners of the short-term rentals to, and they're the ones that suggested this. I mean, they're not fighting it, they're supporting it because they want to be good neighbors, or they know that their economic opportunities at risk.
Let me, one thought I had when I looked at this is it feels slightly redundant, and I am always worrisome of regulations that overlap and potentially create secondary or unintended consequences. And so the idea of where the distance that you live doesn't do anything for your response. So if you, let's just say we agree to the way it's written today, and Joe, whatever, Joe Donor decides he's going to go get an STR. He buys a unit. He lives, right now in San Juan. So he's, within 10 minutes. That does not mean he's going to do anything. And so optically it sounds good, and then you start to play it out. And I think the most important element related to the distance is really related to response times, and having a requirement of responding within 20 minutes. They can figure out how they do that. And if they don't do it, they get violated, and it removes, just one section of, this existing regulation. Actually, so we would be changing the existing regulations, right? Because right now we already have that minimum.
So you'd be striking out the existing.
Well, I mean, at the same time, I don't want to start to unwind things. So let me ask you, Mr. Rossler, does it matter where they live?
No, I agree with you, Commissioner Nelson, that the most important thing is your response time.
Right.
I
That's
think,
how we measure.
I think the code as written, that 25-mile radius, I think it's sufficient. Do we follow up on that? Do we, pinpoint where somebody's living and making sure it's exactly 25? We have not to date. We could moving forward, but I understand your concern with the time frame.
Well, yeah, I mean, my other concern is, they live, 20 miles away. So they've met that requirement, and that's a defense for not getting and responding. It's like, hey, I meet your requirement. It took me longer. I didn't know it was going to take me longer. And there's a defense in the regulation that they've followed the guidelines, and they still got. If they get to make choices, so maybe taking this one out. I know we never discussed this, but
Well, I think it makes sense if you said, if they resolve the problem in 20 minutes, I mean, we're saying if you resolve it in 20 minutes, then you can say, I don't care where you live. On the other hand, our experience has been people that live further away that don't have local management probably are a bigger problem. And I think the other thing we're trying to look at is, although we're sneaking into phase 2, is how many people have rentals and how many, so does a corporation have a rental? Are they going to be able to respond in that time frame? So the driving time is irrelevant if the resolution takes place in 20 minutes.
which is required in that second
Right.
table,
So
right?
maybe we should eliminate that and just stick with the second portion, so we don't overlap and we're not redundant.
Staff have any concerns with recommending the removal of that first section, the
I
distance?
think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
If an individual lives 50 miles away, but they know they have to respond in 20 minutes, then that's going to force them to have a local contact.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of,
Well, and I'll just say anecdotally, 3 out of the 4 citations that came this year, the owner was within 2 miles.
right. Okay, so assume you're tracking all this, so we don't have to make a conclusive motion that says amend this. I mean, we're sort of trying to talk through this, but I think there's a concurrence, and if there isn't, speak now that the first item in this table on page 10, the mileage requirement, that's removed and stricken from the current proposal. Or so we remove the existing, and we don't amend. Our recommended regulation would be to delete this regulation. Okay. And there's the other one I want to talk about, and I'd like the idea of easily knowing how to contact who the STR operator is. But I'm at the same time, I'm really interested in seeing a bunch of signs posted around my neighborhood. And I mean, I don't know specifically how this landed on here. I know we've talked about making sure that there's information available for everybody, but in one weird sort of way, it provides the STR operator advertising that I don't think I know I don't want. And we have technology today that's if you've got an STR neighbor and you need to complain, the first time you got to complain, you may need to go through a process of understanding that. But putting signage out in front of every STR seems like overkill and over communicating, and it takes away from the neighborhood in itself. And I think it's well intended, but I would actually like to see that removed. from this recommendation?
I think if you are a short-term rental operator, it'll be in your best interest to hand that piece of paper out to your neighbors. And I think that would be much more effective than putting a sign up. And I think that would, number one, there's an electronic method for anyone in the city to go on the website and find the number. But at the same time, I think it would be really good business practice for the owner to pass that information out to his neighbors that might be affected.
Can we add a notice provision that says that as part of the permitting process, the STR operator has to notify the adjoining neighbors and provide an acknowledgement form that's retained by the city?
The good neighbor enforcement handout is the document that tells what the steps are, what the phone numbers are, and that should be kept current to the adjoining neighbors. And maybe that's more effective than putting a sign out front.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, do we add that as part of the permitting process to make sure that the city has a copy and a copy of acknowledgement from the adjacent property owners that they are aware of and have the information that they need in case there's a violation?
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, I was going to say we should probably not make it an acknowledgement. We make it
Right,
a
we'll never get the
requirement
acknowledgements.
that staff.
Yeah, but if it's maybe, for instance, just a notice provision
Yeah.
that requires a notice to the neighbors. Otherwise, if we are waiting for something for the neighbor to return back, that's going to be a never-ending nightmare.
So where we put that, I think we're all in agreement that you having a notice provision to all adjacent neighbors. So I don't know, did you want it to go further than the neighbor, that all the abutting neighbors
Neighbors to your right and your left.
and behind you?
Behind you and in front of you.
Yeah. All bordering neighbors, and that would be something that the staff would send out. That would ensure that it actually gets done. I'm sure that the majority of the permit holders would do it, but to ensure it gets done, it's something that staff would send out as a normal course of the permit process. Okay, so
That
what's,
also gives staff.
Is that an annual request? Is that for existing STRs? Is that for phase 2? Just curious.
Yeah, annually.
new or renewals? Probably the easiest way to do it. They renew every year, right?
Before we move on to a new issue, also, I want to go back to the 20-minute. Was there a discussion to add that requirement into the ordinance? I know the decision with respect to 25 miles was to eliminate it. Did we get
We're taking
consensus
the
to add
recommended
the
action.
20-minute?
Yep.
Okay.
Just to clarify, you wanted to have the contact be located within 20 minutes?
They need
No.
to deal with, they need to respond within 20 minutes.
They respond within 20
Yes.
minutes, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
whether they, and abate the
I know.
issue. And I think, I'm guessing, Mr. Rouser, that an owner that has a tenant that's operating, the owner's doing their best. They can't get the tenant to stop doing whatever they're doing. They call the police. At that point, we don't violate the owner because the owner's doing everything they can to stop whatever's going on. Is that fair? I mean, there's some judgments that occur here, obviously. It's not a straight line.
The owner is a permit holder and is ultimately responsible.
So if they can't get the guests to shut up and the police can't, or they can call the police,
They can call the police.
and that's the
And
police.
the
are
police, and
operating.
that's police powers
Right.
to
But
have
in
the authority to
responding,
deal with
that's
that.
responding. I mean, my again, this is where this is going to be a subjective issue, which all code enforcement cases are. I mean, all enforcement of even speed limits are slightly subjective when police officers decide whether to write tickets. I assume your officers are the same way. They take in all the facts before they determine a violation. So responding within 20 minutes, I think, is the most important thing. How and what they do after that is still going to be a code enforcement issue.
My vision of how this occurs is that, hopefully we can get a new hotline. That hotline sends a code officer a text. Even if they're on call, they respond. That takes probably 20 or 30 minutes. To be realistic, maybe 40. By the time that officer gets on site, if there's a continuing violation, like if it's still noisy, that's a violation. If they get there and it's quiet, we're going to assume that the owner did their part.
And going again, I know we're going on and on here, but at the moment that, you know, assuming your scenario plays out and you get it that way, would the response to getting a text be start heading that way and call the contact?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to make sure that, you know, the contact's got to be, you know, notified in order for them to be penalized for not responding.
So the way the new hotline would operate is that hotline person would call the owner and then call code enforcement in
Okay.
a progression. But I think it's smart to also have code enforcement contact the owner after they've been contacted.
Yeah, I
And just,
totally
you know, hey, I'm driving down to Dane Point. I'm going to your property on Santa Clara. What have you done?
Right. Okay. All right. I have no more on that page or that issue. Anybody else? We're all on the same page, I think. Staff, you got all the comments? Okay. Next is, oh, that's the bottom. So I think we're good with that added.
No corporate meeting.
Right. No corporate meetings. Oh, no. Yep. Here we go. No corporate meetings. And the next. So this is more on the noise. So what we're really talking about here is the first one is the amplified noise issue. The second is quiet hours. The third is decibel levels, noise monitors, and then violation, you know, increased enforcement.
I'm okay with the first two. We should, the next two should be struck, and I don't know what the third one actually gets us. I mean, is it just?
You're talking monitors?
No, the noise violations post on site that will remain
okay.
up for 6 months. I mean, it just feels like a scarlet letter.
That wasn't recommended.
Yeah. So I say
You're
we
gonna paint a big X on the front of your house.
on their garage door. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I think so. Let's start with. Does anybody have any issues removing the last recommendation of, you know, some posted notice on? Okay, so that's out. Next was noise monitors, and I brought this up, and I know it's a tricky one, and I know it may or may not. They may or may not be accurate. I think the idea behind it was sort of this ratcheting up of enforcement as they violate. So, you know, if you get a noise complaint and, you know, you're an owner and you don't believe it was even you know, that it was, there was even a noise issue, you know, noise monitors, you know, could potentially provide, you know, somewhat of a snapshot of time of noise at the facility, but it also gives staff the ability to violate. So let's say this happens 2 times and the owner says, I don't think there's any noise. They've got to present data that would prove that. Because one of our challenges is obviously getting out there in time to hear the noise. So that was my thinking. I'm certainly open to not touching that and not adding that as a requirement, but
I don't think we should add it because that's just, the owner has the responsibility to prove he's not making the noise, and the monitor might be at his benefit, but the city shouldn't be involved in that.
Commissioner Murphy? With Vice Chair Donor? Okay. Okay. So and that's fine. Like I said, this was, I appreciate your position that it's really not our place. And if they want to do it, if an owner decided to add noise monitors, would the city accept that as some form of rebuttal to noise complaints?
The appeals process for citations is a hearing.
Yeah.
And we would accept any
So that's
form of,
evidence.
any
So
form
they
of
could
evidence.
bring, if they had a neighbor that was just calling every day saying they're breaking the law.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
That's something that they can do. As it relates to decibel levels, well, we all have decibel meters now in our pockets, right? I think that's a huge issue. I mean, I agree. It's again a nice idea, but sound is not a straight line either. I mean, you got to see community noise levels, which is a 24-hour monitoring, and I think the minute we start entering into scientific measurements, you're gonna have to hire scientists. I don't think we want to do that. So I don't have an issue removing the decibel requirement out of our potential recommended regulations. Anybody else want to see that in there? Okay. Okay. No noise. So I think, Commissioner Gabbard, you said you're good with the no noise?
Yes, I'm good with that. And the no amplifier. Those first
Okay, the first and the second one.
Those two. Yeah, they're fine.
Between 10 and 10 at night, 7 in the morning.
And does that apply to man and dog?
Noise is noise.
And are you gonna run out there at 4 in the morning?
Yep. So when we say no noise, I mean that's an interesting one, and I mean in one sense I think it's well, I'm going to use myself personally as the only way I can look at these obviously is how I can relate personally, and then I can listen to the community and weigh in. Personally, I can hear my neighbors anytime they talk, no matter what, because we live in homes that are, old and uninsulated, and the windows are thin, and the glass is not tempered, and it's just part of living in my neighborhood is if the neighbors are talking indoors and my windows are open, I can hear them. Now my windows are closed, their windows are closed, I can't hear them. So but I have to go outside to hear them, which I could easily do. And there's no way anybody could adhere to this short of, rebuilding their home.
The intent here, and there is some discretion for the code officer, but the intent here is that if it's 11 o'clock and you're on Beach Road and this is a real life scenario, and you have two couples sitting by fire, having a glass of wine, sitting outside talking, the intent is that they should go inside. Like, you are now affecting your neighbors.
Sure.
You should go inside. Now, if they go inside and the code officer is still there and they've quieted it down, but they're still audible, I don't feel that's a violation. If they're yelling and screaming and still partying inside, well, then we still have an issue. So there's a small amount of discretion there, but the intent is to, have outside noise be done by 10 p.m.
We live in a beach community, and when my neighbor's phone rings, I ran to answer it. Took me a while to learn it wasn't my thing. I changed the rant.
Okay. I mean, if that's the case, I don't have an issue with it. I think that would be, that's the one concern that I had. The way this is written is it potentially just makes, well, my wife will friggin' love this because she doesn't like to hear anybody talk. And I think I'm the voice of reason sometimes in my house relative to our neighbors because we can hear them. So I don't have a major issue with this. And I think, in many ways it would be, people who want quiet enjoyment will love to live next to STRs because what they're going to be guaranteed is that there will be no music and there'll be nobody talking after 10 o'clock outside. So, any other changes to that section? Okay.
So to be clear, with respect to number 2, are we leaving it as, currently drafted, or do we want to say no outside noise shall be heard during quiet hours of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m.?
Yeah, that's actually, I think, a good fix. You good with that? Because it clarifies that. I mean, if someone's indoors and you can hear them talking, that's just.
What if you said unreasonable?
Then
It's a judgment call. When you said no outside noise, it's saying, well, I still hear it. Saying, well, is it reasonable or unreasonable? And it's going to be the police or an enforcement officer. You know, somebody says, I'm complaining, my neighbor's making too much noise. Say, well, it's not unreasonable. Sorry.
Well, if they're outside, it is under, if we include it as the outside,
Say, outside.
right?
Yeah, outside unreasonable. Right.
Wouldn't it just be unreasonable if they're outside?
Yeah,
I mean, it's just, if you're outside talking, that's a violation. You got to go indoors. It's after 10. It sort of removes the subjectivity of the enforcement, which would make your guys' job easier. You roll up, they're outside, done, right? Okay.
Correct.
So I think we add the word outside to that second one, and we're good. And the first one remains, and the other three are stricken. All right. Moving on to parking, I believe, is the next one. Yep. I'll start on this one. So I am going through, we're looking at trash waste all the way to advertising. The first one, parking, I'm fine with. Second one, the good neighbor policy, I'm fine with the recommendations. The third, under trash and waste. So I realize we don't have this issue, but would we be able to just add a provision that if they are violated over trash, they automatically have to sign up for trash curbside service? Would that be hard to manage at the staff level or at the enforcement level?
No.
So you could literally just check a box and.
Correct.
Okay. So I'd like to see that one changed then to following a trash or waste collection violation, they would have to sign up for the automator, whatever you call it, the walk-up service. I'm actually going to think about signing up for it, and I don't have to wake up early on Tuesdays and roll my cans out. Why wouldn't you pay that extra money? I mean, it's not cheap, but sleep an extra half an hour. And then on advertising, I mean, I like the idea of, it is not hard. You can go on almost, there's websites they could do this, but if we have a specific size, so, do we have a number, how many numbers our SDR permit includes?
2 letters and 6 numbers.
Okay, so we know what that dimension could be. We could say
Correct.
that every single image that you post on any website has to have this on every single image in the bottom right corner, whatever you want, would make it.
Font.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, font, specific color, size, and font. That way, anybody can pull that up, and if it's not on there, even if they have a permit, they're automatically violated.
Yeah, I like it a lot because, Brenda brought up a really good point is, it's great to require Airbnb and VRBO to do these things, but there's, now 70 other sites out
Right.
there
And
that
if they
are
don't do it-
advertising. So put it back on the owner and the permit holder.
Right.
I like it. I think it's really smart.
Okay. Everybody be good with that?
So are we gonna come up with language on, as part of the code update that says this is the font, this is the pitch?
Oh, I think that's, we'll guide the policy, and then the staff can do the law.
Change would be instead of require online platforms, you're saying require owners to have required field for SDR. So
That on every image it's on.
put it back on the owner, not the.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I mean, I have an Airbnb. I actually use it as a long-term rental, and I'm not confident that they can do anything. I mean, it took them 6 months to resolve a payment dispute that was black and white. So the idea that we're going to rely on these big behemoth machines that, to do our work, it sounds good, but I don't think it's going to happen. And the question then just becomes, what's next? The next platform, the next advertiser. No matter what, if they're advertising and they have an STR, then it needs to be included on the images. If there's no images, then, you know, in the subject, I mean, you guys, I think I would lean on staff to decide the best way to do that. And then you could make changes as, you know, as things change. Because I think today it's Airbnb, VRBO, you know, 20 years ago was the local realtor. What's it going to be in 15 years from now? You know, these things we should be setting these up to just shift as technology changes. So that would be the only one there for me. So any objections to those changes or suggestions for other changes? No? Okay. Next one is the violations. So, and I don't have any comments. I like 3 strikes and you're out.
Plus increased funds.
Yeah, to the extent we can.
Is there a limit on how much you can fine people?
Yeah. That's in the legislature's discussing change. I don't know how far that's gone, if you've been tracking that, but there is a...
SB 60 got out of committee, so
Oh, it did? Okay.
it's going to go to the floors. It went to both floors last session, but they ran out of time to vote on it. I don't foresee it not passing,
Okay.
but the 5,000 increase is specific to STR violations.
Great. Any questions or changes from anybody?
So just to be clear on the last one, we're fine with the increased fine to $1,000 per violation, unless potentially we can go higher per state law. And then, or maybe we should draft it as maximum
Allowed by
state
yeah.
law to provide for flexibility. And then your 3 strikes and you're done and your permit's revoked? Or are we going to have like a resetting of the clock for certain levels of violations? Like a Class
I
A
think
violation, Class B violation, or is it just 3
I
strikes
think-
and you're done?
Yeah, I mean, if I go back, this is my own personal opinion. If I go back and look at, you know, the data that Mr. Rossler provided us and the history, we have had some bad actors, and most of them are gone. I don't know if we've got anybody that has more than 3 violations over a long period of time. But if we do, maybe we don't want them anymore. And, you know, if they want a permit, if we are issuing new permits after their permits are, you know, after they lose their permit, I think they would have the ability to come back and try to get another permit, but they would lose the one that they've got, I would think.
We could always put in language that's similar to our development applications, where it says basically if you've been denied, you can't reapply for 1 year.
That's
so
good.
maybe language along those lines.
Sort of a sit down, you're in timeout for
You're
a
in
year. and-
timeout.
Yeah, I like that.
And can we increase the fee?
Yeah, we can do both. Yeah.
I think there should be a penalty fee for through-time violator that's set out a year and they're coming back. They shouldn't be paying the regular STR permit fee. They should be paying some sort of a premium.
Yeah, I like that. I think a discussion maybe down the road, as we start to talk about you know, what's allowed, what's not allowed, where are they allowed, is the idea of some form of discretionary permit issuance as part of our pilot program.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of fines for penalties, we can increase to the maximum state allows. I think for the actual permit application fee, that gets into a little bit of a problematic area because that's established by a city council resolution. And so
It's got to be based on some.
Right, you can't
Yeah.
charge more than actually it costs to process
Right.
the permit. So that's why we can't charge more just because they're potentially bad actors. But we have discussed, you know, potentially that if they have had a permit revoked, they wouldn't be eligible for a permit. So
I don't have a problem with that. I think revocation that should be it. Go somewhere else. We don't want you. You've done enough damage. We, in my opinion, have to take this super serious. If we're going to do anything different, any pilot program, we have to make sure that our enforcement provisions are strong, and you don't want to lose your permit if you have one because you'll never get another one.
So are we doing the timeout for a year, or are we doing 3 strikes and you're done and you can never get another one?
I'm open, to talk. I'm open to it. But I don't have an issue if you have if your permit's revoked, which requires 3 violations, then you shouldn't get another one. That's where I'm comfortable with at this point.
I think probably if someone was time out for a year, you'll get a different name for that person. So I'm not sure you could control that totally. Child, spouse.
You can control it by property address, maybe.
Yeah.
Three strikes and you're out.
Period. Game over. No more games.
Okay, got it.
Good. Okay. I think, if I'm not mistaken, does that cover all of them? Is there any other thoughts, comments that my fellow commissioners want to bring up?
I think we really need to make it clear to the city council that phase one is increasing because an ex-city council member was here, and I looked at his letter, and there were 6 points, and each of them were phase two. So even though we've tried to make it clear that phase one is enforcement, but everybody that was talking was, you need to limit it to this type, you need to have less density, so that's a confusing part that's going to be very confusing to people that we're passing it on to. We've spent a lot of time with it. And the second phase is going to be a lot harder than the first phase. And so I think that really needs to be emphasized strongly.
All right. You don't need a motion, right? Or do you?
I'm going to say that for the record, I heard the motion to be moving staff's recommendation as amended as we went through the table in our planning commission discussion.
All right. So for the record, we've gone through each recommendation, and staff has taken down all of our comments and is going to forward those on to the city council for their consideration. Great. And that ends that item. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Brings us to the next item, which is, I would guess, staff reports. If I could find it.
First, thank you for that very efficient discussion. Really do appreciate that. Let the Plan Commission know that the Selva triplex has been appealed. So that is expected to go to the City Council in their second meeting in May. So that's nothing else to report for tonight. Thank you.
Any commissioner comments? No? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for all the effort from the SDR committee. A lot of work to get to this point, so I appreciate everybody's commitment and effort, and I think, as we continue to work on this process, I look forward to the outcome. With that, I'll close the meeting.